Think back to a moment in your childhood when you felt truly comfortable, truly at ease in your own skin. Perhaps it was the feeling of warm sand between your toes, the rhythmic sway of a swing, or the soothing sound of your mother's voice. Now imagine that those same sensations, touch, movement, sound, feel overwhelming, even chaotic. Imagine that your senses are sending you a constant barrage of information that your brain struggles to process. This is the experience of many children, particularly those on the autism spectrum, who face challenges with sensory processing. This is Ananya Child Development Center podcast, and today we are going beyond the surface. We are exploring the hidden world of sensory integration with a renowned expert who's dedicated her career to helping children navigate the complexities of their sensory experiences. I'm your host, Madhvi Adimulam, and I'm honored to be joined by Sian Wilson, a highly experienced pediatric occupational therapist from the UK who's visiting Ananya CDC here in Hyderabad. Sian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me here today. It's been incredible to come to your beautiful therapy centre and visit the space and the people and some of the children that visit here. Thank you.
Sian, you've had such a rich and diverse career, working in various settings from the NHS to schools and private clinics, and even venturing to India to set up a therapy program for children with autism. What were some of these early experiences that ignited your passion for this work, particularly with children on the autism spectrum?
The reason I became an occupational therapist was when I was a nanny in America, in San Francisco. One of the children that I was working with had severe developmental delay. I was very young at the time, and I was looking after 3 children, one with developmental delay, and I didn't really know how to help this particular child. So what happened, this was kind of in the 80s, and there was an incredible therapy developmental center in California. And I went to this center with this child several times. I could not believe that very, very simple things I could do at home with this little boy could actually change him physically to be able for him to develop on a very practical way. So when I first went, he was not able to sit up. He could do nothing. When I left, he was able to roll and crawl and all sorts of things. And I just thought, this is a miracle. This is what I want to do. I went back to the UK and I trained as an OT. Historically, I've never done any other job except paediatric occupational therapy. But for many years, I worked in the health service. When I first started, there was a lot of children with cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, and gradually through my career, more and more students were coming to our therapy service with autism. We had a service for diagnosing children with all sorts of different diagnoses, but we didn't have anything specialist. So me and my boss at the time decided that something needed to change, and together we got some funding to do a research project on the gaps for services in autism in a borough in West London called Ealing. That's where my curiosity started, from speaking to parents, listening to what they were finding difficult and their concerns and what they needed. That started a very, very big project in Ealing, which then expanded through the whole country. The seed was sown. And from that initial project, we built out many services, including a specialist diagnostic service for children on the autistic spectrum. But the most important thing after that was providing support to the parents and carers and also the teachers and other therapists, how to support the children with autism at home and at school in their various contexts. And that's where it all started. And gradually over my career, I started working with very young children, sort of, 2 and 3 at diagnostic stage. And then through now, for the last sort of 9-10 years, I've been working with teenagers and thinking about what this next stage is. Interestingly enough, I've gone through all the stages of childhood up to adolescence, and now I'm looking into adulthood and seeing massive gaps in services for adults with autism in the UK.
Thank you, Shan, for sharing your experience with us. Imagine if you think that UK has gaps in its system in helping children with special needs and developmental delays. Imagine the kind of challenges we face in India. They are definitely another level. Shan, can you please explain what is occupational therapy? Is occupational therapy different from sensory, or is there a connection between OT and sensory integration, and which comes first? If I'm a parent, how do I know whether I should do sensory integration first or OT first?
That's a brilliant question, and I'm going to answer it very simply. Because an occupational therapist helps children, adults with any disability, with developing their independent skills and quality of life. One of the brilliant things we do is something called activity analysis. So you take any activity in your life. It could be something really simple that a child does, a baby, sort of sucking their thumb, to holding a pencil for writing in an academic class at school, right up to making your bed when you're an adult at university and beyond. So each activity in your life can be analysed in many, many ways. And what occupational therapy does is analyse those activities in levels such as sensory, motor, behaviour, cognition, social, all the different complexities of that skill. And then they look to see what specific area of that skill is breaking down and why you can't do it. So occupational therapists need to have a very broad range of tools to support the development of that skill. Now, sensory is a part of a skill, and it's very important within children on the autistic spectrum, because part of the diagnostic criteria of autism is sensory. So we know that children on the autistic spectrum have sensory processing difficulties. And we know that a lot of the skills that they are developing rely on very good sensory processing. There's a profile often with sensory difficulties with autism that they're going to struggle with a lot of skills which have foundations in sensory, but they might not have. So you have to make sure that it's not just occupational therapy. The sensory processing and the sensory integration part of that is a tool in the box of occupational therapists. It's a huge toolbox. So, for example, if you took one skill, let's just take, tying shoelaces, because we do a lot of that in England. Your first starting point is occupational therapy, so that you can pinpoint exactly what area of the skill is breaking down. So if you came to an occupational therapist and said, my child can't sit at the table for their dinner, what we'd have to take a big step back and analyse that skill on many multifaceted levels. One of those areas would be sensory. You could probably guarantee that a child with autism would find it difficult to be sitting at a table because they've got sensory issues, and it could be all sorts of areas. It could be as simple as that they don't want to eat the food that's been put in front of them because of the sensory smell. But it could also be that there's a huge social expectation that they're finding complex too. So it's not one thing or another, it's actually a blend, and you have to think of the whole thing. The answer is It's not OT, it's not OT and SI. Sensory integration therapy is a tool that occupational therapists use. And it's a very important tool to have when you're dealing with children on the autistic spectrum.
Thank you so much, Shan, for explaining that so clearly. It was very confusing for me as a non-occupational therapist to explain this concept to parents. I think now when I talk to parents, I'll be able to explain this better. Observing children in their natural environment and seeing what they can do or they cannot do and what they're struggling with gives us the information that we need to make decisions as to what therapy protocol you're going to follow for the child, right?
Observation in the environment of the skill that you're trying to focus on is absolutely essential. So if the problem is shoelaces, you need to see the child doing shoelaces. You need to see them perform that functional activity. Then you need to go back and find out the specifics of that task where it's breaking down. Now, for that, you might need specific assessment tools. You can use standardized assessments, non-standardized, formal, informal, but you need to actually dig deeper to find out why they can't do that skill.
Shan, so first thing would be understanding and observing the child, getting the background history of how his childhood was or birth history of the child, then deciding whether I would like to do a formal assessment or an informal assessment, and then what would happen.
After selecting the assessment and whatever they are, and it can be completely unique to each child and each situation and each family, you take those assessments, conduct those assessments, and then you would score those assessments. And then you'd gather all the information together. And this is the most important part of OT, the clinical reasoning. So when you get the information, and what you're trying to do is get an outcome of intervention. And there's a massive piece in between where you have to think and hypothesize and work out what the developmental levels are, the sensory problems, and it's very, very complex. So you won't ever come up with sort of like one size fits all, because the clinical reasoning is what we do well. That's what occupational therapists do, is they understand clinical reasoning. And so that's why you can't just do a checklist and get a program. The most important thing is the hypothetical reasoning, the critical thinking, to ensure that the program that you're doing is for that child and it'll actually work.
Thank you. A lot of times I've had experiences where parents have been to therapy centers where there's no documentation at all. They've been there for 1 year. And parents don't have any record of how the child was 1 year ago and the entire journey through the year. So it becomes very difficult for us who are trying to put some method into this madness in India, where there's no documentation, to putting some documentation in place. Do you document every step of the way? How do you show the progress of the child? What happens in the UK?
We have specific outcome measures. That would be our dream, what we want to happen, our goal, that big picture thinking. So let's take the analogy of tying your shoelaces. The dream would be, yes, I would be tying my shoelaces on my shoes every day going to school. That would be your goal or your outcome. So that's the big picture. And what we would do is we break that down into tiny steps. It's actually really difficult to make a first step that's completely achievable, totally realistic, effective for you, and is important to you. So whatever's important to me is not important to you. So we have to find out that how we're actually going to start that program. So I could say, this is what you need to do, and I could give you a program of all the steps you need. The most difficult thing about any program is executing that program and taking the action and the specific action that you need to be able to push forward on that. And that is really difficult. And that's where you need the support from a therapist, coach, or a mentor to help you make those first steps so you can start making those action plans and actually do it, what you need to do. The execution of any plan is completely unique. It could be as simple as changing something in your environment. It could be sort of changing something about the task itself or when it's done. It could be something very simple like not even wearing shoes with shoelaces. You could completely take something out of the equation. And also, if a child has the cognitive ability and the developmental level, I would always ask them. A very good example was a goal that was set by a parent in lockdown. During COVID, it was really interesting. I was doing a session on Zoom with a parent and a child, and we were talking about goal setting and et cetera, et cetera. And the goal was riding a bike. And we had a long conversation on Zoom about how you ride a bike, what you need to do sensorially. It's a huge vestibular, that's the balance sense. We needed to really develop that. Motorically, we needed to develop that. And the student said, but I don't want to ride a bike. I've got no interest in riding a bike at all. So because the motivation wasn't there, we had to really rethink about goals. So it's very important to listen to, as a therapist, you need to listen to the parents, you need to listen to the student, you need to listen to the teachers, to all the people surrounding that student to find out what is the most important and the priority goal, and then start working on that.
So, once we have the assessment in place and what parents want and their expectations are there with you, how do you plan therapy? Do you involve parents in therapy plan, or do you approach as like based on whatever your findings are in the assessment? Do you come up with a plan and then discuss with the parents? How does it work?
It really varies depending what type of situation that you work in and how old the child is. There's lots of variables, but the main thing is that you need to do a plan with the family, or if you're in a school, with the teachers. So it's not that I decide what to do, it's we decide together what the priorities are and how we're going to do it, and what it actually looks like in practice. So that could be anything from working on a very, very specific foundation skill, as you like, for the child. It could be working specifically on sensory integration therapy, or it could be some very specific skill building in practice if you were looking at dressing, for example. And the nature of the therapy plan and what it looks like and the timings are completely different. Often you need to have quite a lot of input at the very beginning to help either the teacher or the student or the parent understand exactly what perhaps the developmental steps are, what the expectations are, all sorts of different things like that. You might need to put in a lot of support at the very, very beginning. Some students need just some advice, some very specific advice, shown how to do a skill very specifically or part of a skill, and then go away and practice it, because a practice effect might be the most important thing. So it really varies, but what you need to have is an understanding from both sides, from the therapist and the student and the parent and the teacher, as to what is the expectation and some of the timelines, and you need to write it down, because then you've got a specific record, and there's no, oh, I didn't know this or I didn't know that. If you've got it written down, if you've got a specific record, then you can refer back to it, and you need to date that. Now, it doesn't matter if you achieve a goal or not. If you don't achieve a goal, then you could reflect on why. Because it could be that the child, once you start working with the child, you really don't know what to expect or how much practice they've done or what what is happening with them. So some goals are achieved incredibly quickly. Some goals are never achieved fully, or they might be completely changed halfway through. But the most important thing is having a record of achievements. So you can do this in many, many different ways, depending on the setting. I work in a school at the moment and we have lots of records. So every single time I see a student, I write down what they've done. We always kept clinical records. And the only difference now is that everything is paper free. What you're trying to do is with therapy is actually achieve a goal. You're developing function and participation and engagement in a task. You want this child to be independent. And that's what you're achieving. That's what you're focused on. And as long as you're going in the right direction, that's great. But you need to track it. What you measure gets done. If you don't measure it, it won't get done. So you need to do that. It's incredibly important. We know that children move places, they have different goals, things change. It's like an onion skin. Children change over time. We know that. And if a child just moves school, it's, for me as a therapist, and we have a transition every year of sort of like a whole new load of children coming into our school this year. And we have a big transition period of observing the child or their children in their previous schools. But we have all the paperwork that's been written from the previous school. And we can literally, although it's a different environment, we've got a really good starting point. And that's really important because you need to continue progression. The most difficult thing about therapy is getting it started and getting the momentum. Once you've got the momentum, you can carry on. But if you stop it, then it's really hard to get started.
Yeah. So, Shan, how do we develop a working relationship and a rapport with our parents and make them active part of the therapy process?
I think in my experience, it's the first thing is listening to what they actually have to say. And that's active listening and making sure that as a therapist, you really understand they're not just asking, but what they really, really need to change their life and really understand their background, their environment, what's actually really happening. Because what we need to set is SMART goals. Lots of people talk about this: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timed. And that is very, very difficult. We can't project into the future. We can't really speculate. So we have to hypothesize that if you do specific things in a specific order, then you can get this particular result. So first thing is listening, and then really sitting down and thinking together with the parent or the teacher or the student themselves how this plan is going to be implemented, and just be really honest about what is achievable. And sometimes you need to rein people back, like really seriously. And some people you need to push forward. Some people don't believe they can do certain things, and you need to make sure that they understand that they can. And other situations, it might be so far down the line that you need to be very clear about what they're taking on. And the most difficult thing is doing things day to day to day and giving that support, and don't give up. And having the motivation, do you really want to do this? And it's like, if it's yes, we're going to support them all the way. So being really honest and listening.
Thank you, Shan, for that wonderful answer. I have one more question for you. There are lots of children who might have, conditions that might be pervasive and it will probably last a lifetime. For example, I have a son with autism, and I know that he will remain autistic for the rest of his life, and it's an ongoing journey for us. How do we keep parents motivated and engaged throughout this journey?
I can only explain from some of the experience I've had as a professional OT. I think one of the biggest things is developing a support network and a community around the child, around yourself as well. I think, as a mum, it's really difficult just to keep going some days. And, being able to pick up the phone or knowing some people that have perhaps going through the same things or anything, it's just you need to keep yourself supported. You need to keep yourself well. You need to have people around you that actually understand what you're going through, because it's really tough some days. I think some of the kids I've met over the years have been absolutely extraordinary, and they've been my best teachers. And keeping things fun, keeping things interesting, I think keeping a very strict routines of what you can manage and what you can't manage, and actually organising your life is really, really important. And just you managing your own expectations as well is extremely important. But I think community is the biggest thing. And one of the unusual things that happened from the research project we did is we had some focus groups, and that developed into a very big community of parents that would support each other. And in the school that I work in at the moment, we have a really good supportive network of parents that just support each other, and just sometimes you just need that person just to talk through. So I think that's kind of one thing I would say.
Yeah. I can't agree more, because having a good support system at home and in the community really helps them get, because these are long-term situations and we just don't have a timeline for this. It is important that we start thinking long-term than thinking short-term, and building support systems for long-term. I agree with you completely. I can't wait to see you in action, Sean, next week, because we were discussing since yesterday about mentoring and coaching for parents. I think it becomes very clear for me when you actually do it with the group of parents here at Ananya. And I'm sure they are going to go out of the session with some kind of a plan in place, which they have developed and for their child, and which they can implement at their home. I think what more can we ask for? I wanted this 25 years ago for Varun. I think finally we are able to do it for parents. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your heart with us today. It's been a privilege to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to share my experience, and I hope people learn, and I'm always here to ask questions.
And for those of you in Hyderabad, Sean will be at Ananya from the 16th and the 20th, working with parents, coaching and mentoring them. At Ananya Child Development Center, we are committed to providing personalized support for children with developmental delays, offering a range of therapies including occupational therapy and speech therapy. We are located in multiple locations across Hyderabad, making quality care accessible to families throughout the city. I'm Madhavi Adimulam, and this is Ananya Child Development Center podcast.